Dobro večer, polako ćemo početi s današnjom tribinom. Prvo ću pozdraviti našu gošću, švedsku aktivistkinju i feministkinju KAJSU EKIS EKMAN. KAJSA EKIS EKMAN je spisateljica, novinarka i aktivistkinja, rođena 1980. u Štokholmu. Napisala je 3 knjige, a njezina prva knjiga je Biti i biti kupljena, prostitucija, surogatstvo i podijeljeno ja. Ona uspoređuje seksualnu industriju i industriju surogat majčinstva, te kako oboje komodificiraju ženska tijela. Kritizira pojam seksualnog rada kao neobično savezništvo između neoliberalne desnice i postmoderne ljevice, koja se koristi za legitimiranje seksualne industrije. Ona također tvrdi, a to ćemo vjerujem i čuti, da sindikate za seksualne radnice u mnogim slučajevima financiraju makroji, države i akademici, a oni imaju vrlo malo veze sa radničkom borbom. Ukradeno proljeće opisuje kako je eurokriza utjecala na grčko gospodarstvo i predstavlja kritiku mjera štednje. Njezina najnovija knjiga o značenju spola objavljena je na švedskom, španjolskom i engleskom jeziku i bavi se teorijom rodnog identiteta i njezinim implikacijama za žene, djecu i homoseksualne osobe. Thank you very much for coming here and having a lecture for us. It will be very interesting and we are I think, very delighted to have you here. So thank you, KAJSA.
But it's an honor to be here. It's my first time here in Croatia. I hope not the last. It's great that there are so many people from all over the Balkans. And I think it shows that when it comes to women's issues and women's struggles, we are facing the same dilemmas everywhere. You know, the more I travel and speak about these issues, the more I realize that, you know, the debate is basically the same all over the place. You know, it's not so when we speak about economy or geopolitics or war, you know, it can really differ the angles. But when it comes to women's issues, everywhere I go, I hear the same things. So today I'm going to speak about 2 of the most delicate and perhaps contested topics of feminist debate: prostitution and gender identity. So fasten your seat belts, because if you are not familiar with this debate, maybe you will be shocked. So as you were saying, Nada, my first book was about prostitution and surrogacy. And I've been asked to speak about this because I know that here there is a debate about whether it should be legalized or decriminalized or what should be done with it. And my definition of prostitution is very simple. It's sex between 2 people, one person that wants it and one person that doesn't. So the person that wants the sex pays the person that doesn't want the sex. Prostitution is the only way in which older men can get access to younger men who don't want them legally. Because all the other ways for these older men to get access to younger girls are criminalized, like rape, like kidnapping, like abuse, like harassment. Even in the most patriarchal country, you are not allowed to just go out and rape somebody. Now, if you pay her pimp €5, all of a sudden, that's not called rape, that's called prostitution, and it's legal. You know, and it baffles me still how some people continue to claim that the money is a proof that there is consent. To me, as a feminist, it is crystal clear that the money is the proof that there is no consent. Because if you take away the money from the equation, what is there? You know, she doesn't want it. So if he's still going to have sex with her, that is rape, right? So whenever there is an exchange of money, it means that the person who's receiving the money, or the person that being the object in case of her not receiving the money directly, doesn't want the sex. If you doubt this, try to go to a woman in prostitution and ask her, you know, you can take the money and you can stay for the sex, or you can leave. And you all know she's going to leave. She's not going to stay for the sex. She doesn't want the sex, right? Prostitution is at the intersection of most systems of domination. It is at the intersection of capitalism, patriarchy, classism, colonialism. The person buying has the upper hand in so many ways. He is a man. 100% of the people buying are male. There are like 0.00 something female buyers that don't even enter into the percentage. Of the people selling, 90% are women and girls. So this is a clearly gendered issue. He's also older than her in most cases. He's richer than her. He's whiter than her. He has a better situation socially than her. He has often a job. He has a house. He's married. He has kids. She doesn't have any of that. She's on the run from somewhere, from her home where she's being abused, from her home country where she's poor, from some guy, or from just a generally unstable situation of poverty. So there is an imbalance in almost every way when it comes to prostitution. Prostitution, if you want to simplify it in a more vulgar way, you could say that it's a dick going where it's not welcome, right? Because prostitution is about dicks. There is no prostitution without a dick. There's not two women prostituting to each other. Like that, I think now you're trying to think, is there a case? Yeah, maybe there is a case somewhere, but there is no sex industry that's about women selling themselves to each other. So prostitution is about dicks going where nobody wants them. So what I wanted to focus on, because I'm not going to speak about everything that I write in my book about prostitution, because it's a very profound debate. But I want to focus on two things. First of all, how prostitution is being defended today. And I think we have to understand that the debate we're having now about legalizing or, abolishing prostitution is a debate that we had 100 years ago in Europe when it came to the reglementation of prostitution. So the defenders of prostitution back then, like the French hygienist Parent Duchâtelet, claimed that prostitution was natural, it was necessary for civilization, for marriage, and for men. They were saying men need this. If men don't get access to this class of prostituted women, they will start raping decent women on the street. They will start, being so demanding to their wives. They're going to want sex all the time, and a decent wife doesn't want that. So it's going to be awful to be in a marriage. Men are going to create chaos everywhere if they don't get prostitution. So prostitution, it was said, was necessary for civilization to be maintained, right? Now, that model didn't work. What happened with that model was it led to trafficking. It led to what was then called the white slave trade. So the League of Nations made a study in the beginning of the 20th century trying to investigate the causes of the slave trade. And they realized the causes were the regulated prostitution system, which was then abolished in country after country in Europe, right? So the interesting thing is now that prostitution is coming back due to a number of factors, we're having this debate again, but we don't have it with the same arguments. So if prostitution back then was defended with conservative arguments, which patriarchy was back then, when people wanted to defend patriarchy and patriarchal institutions and capitalist institutions, they did it with conservative arguments. Now, patriarchy is being defended with arguments from feminism and from the left. And it's crucial to understand this, because if we don't understand that, we get confused. We hear arguments that we recognize that we think are feminist, but they're being used, kidnapped in order to defend patriarchal and capitalist institutions. So now we're being told prostitution is no longer called prostitution because it sounds miserable. It's called sex work. Now we're told sex work is not natural anymore. It's subversive. It's not for men. It's for women. It's not for marriage. It's for breaking down heteronormativity. It's not because men need this. It's because women want this. So, whereas before they used to say that the prostitute was a woman who was basically the female equivalent of the male criminal. She was a fallen woman. She was no good for anything else. She basically couldn't have a real job, so her only purpose in life was to serve these men. Now we're told the opposite. Now we're told that the prostituted woman, renamed sex worker, is a role model. She's empowered, she's liberated, she's like the super feminist. So it's the extreme opposite of what we were told back then, right? But it's the same industry. The industry is the exact same thing. When we read accounts, the rare accounts that we have of prostitution from 100 years ago, we see the same violence. We see the sex buyers are the same married men. We see the women are the same impoverished young girls being lured into prostitution by pimps, being trafficked across borders. We see the same violence, the same desperation, the same STDs being spread, women having children that the customers or the sex buyers don't want to take care of, that are being, left to nobody or abandoned, or even worse, being brought up in the sex industry. So we see it's the same industry being defended with the opposite arguments, right? In Sweden, where I live, since '99, we have a model that used to be called the Swedish model, that's now called the Nordic model or the abolitionist model. In Africa, they call it the Sankara model, after the revolutionary leader of Burkina Faso. So it has different names, but basically what it means is decriminalizing the woman selling sex or the person selling sex, and criminalizing the buyer of sexual services and the pimps. So it means that you consider the responsible person in the sex industry being the buyer, the male buyer. So he's the one doing this. He is the one that has a choice. He's the one that can stop the sex industry if he wants to. She doesn't have a choice. She's the victim of sexual crime. So simplified, that's that model. Has this model eradicated all prostitution? No, of course we still have prostitution. It would, if that model eradicated prostitution, it would be the first law in history to stop crime. I don't know any law that stopped crime. Like in all countries, you have laws against killing people. It doesn't mean that you don't kill people. In all countries, you have laws against violence against women. It doesn't mean that nobody hits their girlfriend. So we all know laws don't do that. But what they do is they change the culture and they change the morals. And they also reduce crime. So whereas before the law, we had 1 in 8 Swedish males paying for sex, now we have 1 in 12 Swedish men paying for sex, and most of them abroad. Whereas in Spain, we know it's 1 in 2 or 1 in 3 males paying for sex. In Germany, it's also 1 in 4 males paying for sex. These studies, okay, you have to take them with a pinch of salt because they're asking, so we don't know if some are exaggerating, some are saying they did when they didn't, and some are saying they didn't when they did. But clearly you can see that there is a difference. You can even see a difference between Sweden and Denmark, which are culturally very similar, but whereas Denmark has a legal sex industry, brothels everywhere, strip clubs, and Sweden doesn't. Having this law means that if you pay for sex and you're caught, you will now, if you are a repeated offender, go to prison. They made the law harsher a half a year ago. So it also means that if you're a famous person and you pay for sex and you are discovered, it means that you will be on TV. This guy paid for sex. It means your girlfriend's going to find out. It means, your colleagues are going to find out. Your boss is going to find out. So this is changing the whole landscape of prostitution, because prostitution used to be about the woman. It used to be, she's the whore. She's the one that's in the light. She's the one that's stigmatized. She's the one to blame for this. He is in the shade. He's in the shadow. Nobody knows what he's doing. In some countries, like sex buyer doesn't even have a name for it. He's just a man, right? Now that's changing. So now, instead of having the stigma of being a woman in prostitution, we have the stigma of being the sex buyer. So no man in Sweden would publicly brag about being a sex buyer. It's something that he would never say to anybody. And it's something that he would never, for example, go with his friends, or for example, if an office wants to celebrate a deal, they would never do it in a strip club or a brothel because that's illegal. So it means there's a cultural change, and that I'm very happy to live in a society like that. So basically, that's what I wanted to say about prostitution. There's a lot more in my first book, Being and Being Bought. So for the ones of you who haven't read it, if you're interested in the topic, and there's also more recent books on the subject.